Hi everyone, welcome back. For today's card I'm using Mama Elephant's Botanic Thanks stamp, which is quite a large stamp, but it's got the word thanks in amongst a whole load of florals, which I thought was quite nice. And to start with, I've got my stamp platform here and some watercolor paper. I'm going to first line up the stamp where I want it. I have an idea, and because it's such a big stamp I wanted to mostly use that whole piece of paper. I'm using an anti-static powder tool to get rid of any oils that might be on the paper, and then using a Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, to stamp the image. And I'm probably going to do this a few times just to get a nice stamped, a good stamped image on there. Once I've done that, I'm going to take a piece of paper that I folded in half, and I'm going to use some clear embossing powder. Now I used a clear embossing powder this time because the paper is like it's an off-white. Most watercolor papers are off-white, and that is the color that will show through, but I could have used a white embossing powder. I could have used any color, but for this technique I like the way the white comes through, and I used a Cosmic Shimmer Detail Clear embossing powder. It's quite a nice embossing powder actually. I've got a couple of the different shades, in this sort of clear range, I guess, if you call it that. And I decided to heat set this off camera just because my camera does tend to overheat, so I've already heat set this so it's nice and shiny. Then I've got three of the newer colors from Ranger and Tim Holtz. So I have Kitsch Flamingo, I have Speckled Egg, and I have Rustic Wilderness. So I have a pink, a blue and a green. And I think in hindsight the richer, deeper colors would work better, but I do get this to work and it does look very pretty. So I've just gone direct to paper, and then I have spritzed it fairly heavily with some water, and then I'm going to dry in between each layer. And just be sure to move your heat tool as much as possible. Don't keep it in one spot to dry too much, because you don't want to burn the embossing powder that's already there. So I'm just sort of being careful how I dry this off, but between each layer you need each layer to be dry before you go on to the next one. And then once I've got a layer that's mostly dry, if there's any massive blobs of water, I'll just use a paper towel just to soak them up. But I don't really want to get rid of too much of the color, so I'm careful when I do that. And then I'm going back in with the edge of the ink pad, the edge or the corner of the ink pad, I'd say. And again, just adding more color where I think I might need it. Like I say, the green is the one that's you're going to see the most. But I love the reaction between the pink and the blue as well. You get this sort of purpley color that sort of comes out, and it's just so pretty. So again, if there's if there's a lot of pooling of liquid around the edges, I just use the edge of my paper towel and just sort of gently soak it up. And again, just going in and letting each color dry where it is, because if I mop up each layer, I'm going to land up taking all that ink up with me, which I don't want to do. I want that color to sit on the paper. So I'm trying not to, I want it to dry with the pigment there, but I don't want necessarily puddles of water in there. If that made any sense. It's Sunday and I'm half asleep still, so when I'm doing this. So again, going back in after each layer, and you just go until you're happy with it. Now I did try this with, what ink did I use? I tried it with some Lawn Fawn ink. It kind of worked, but not really. I landed up with the I have some of the colors in the mini ink cubes, and I did exactly the same thing with heat embossing. And as I went to add the color, it's almost like the ink dried too quickly. So this is where Distress ink works so well for this. Using the larger ink pads still works, but the mini distressings would work even better. You can sort of be more precise, I think, but the larger ones work fine. I don't have the mini, so but this worked worked for me. But yeah, the lawn fawn tended to, it seemed to, like the square of the ink, or the lines where I'd put the ink, they stayed there, whereas with the distressing you can see it just dissolves, is the wrong word, but it's sort of like it just flows better. It doesn't, that's not the right word, but it doesn't leave marks where I've put the ink. It just dissolves it. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. So you don't land up with lines on your paper, basically. And although the color from the previous one that I tried, that I didn't bother putting in this video, although the end result wasn't too bad, it still, I could see all these lines everywhere, and it didn't look right for me. So that wasn't what I wanted to show you. So for me, the distressings work by far the best. I think just because of the nature of the ink and what it's meant to do, and how it stays so much wet for so much longer, even though it's a dye ink. So for me, this works beautifully. It'll be interesting if you tried it with an oxide as well. You'll get a different result. So as you can see, there it is. Look at all those different colors, how they sort of, there's even a bit of yellow in there, I've just noticed. So to finish off the card, I have a sentiment from the same stamp set, and I'm just going to use some VersaFine Onyx Black ink right along the edge of the same white cardstock that is the base of my card. And I'm just going to let that dry. It takes a little while to dry, so try not to put your finger in it because it will smudge. And then I have cut down the watercolor panel. I basically had this, I think it's about 6 by 4-ish inches, this card base. So I just cut down the watercolor panel to fit. It's the right length, but I just trimmed it a bit so it's sort of more in the center of the card. You'll see that in a second. And then because I felt like it needed something extra, and because my sentiment is in black, I decided to add just a couple of strips of black cardstock on the top and the bottom, which you'll see in a second as well. So just got some super sticky tape. Everything's flat, or at least for this part. The sentiment will pop up, but this part of the card, I'm going to keep everything flat. Lots of adhesive on the back, because sometimes with watercolor, even though it's watercolor paper and it's meant to cope with moisture, it can tend to still warp a bit. So I still like to have lots of adhesive on the back there. And then for these little strips, I really should have just let it hang over the edge on both sides, because when I looked at it afterwards on the left hand side, it looks like it's not lined up properly. So, you know, just let it overhang both sides and then trim it off like I'm doing here, and it'll look perfect. Still looks cute, but you know, it's one of those things when you're in the middle of it, you just kind of do, and then afterwards you're looking and go, oh, maybe I should have done it this way. Now that my sentiment's dry, I'm just going to trim it down with my paper trimmer. This is the Botanic Tim Holtz paper trimmer. I love this thing. I use it all the time. And just using the guides to trim that around that. And then I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of the sentiment, just for something. I think otherwise it would look a little too flat because it's quite a small sentiment. I think it just popping it up just adds a little bit to it. And then I also thought afterwards that maybe I could have, on the black strips, I could have also either added some, like a glittery pen, you know, like a aqua marker, or a aqua shimmer pen, or like a Spectrum Noir one in just a clear shimmer. Or I could have added some glossy accents or something like that, so the strips are shiny, just to add something else to it. You could add sequins to it, things like that. But that's it. But I love all the colours. I love how the reaction between those 3 colours, that's the key thing though. Just make sure the colours that you use are going to work next to each other. So if you're not sure, I would Google a color chart, and then that way you'll be able to see which colors work next to each other. Sometimes opposite colors will create mud, which you don't want. So, and I also just want to say thank you for all of you. I do this because I love it, but your support is what helps my channel. So thank you for all of your support and love and subscribing and thumbs upping and all that fun stuff. And I will see you in the next one, guys. Bye.